The whole Trump thing, Trump, the media people around him, his family and inner circle, all of it is one big grift machine, and they have been trying to enrich themselves for a long time. That did not stop once the campaign started. And joining us now to break down some amazing reporting is the Washington correspondent for Business Insider, as well as the author of Piety and Power, Mike Pence and the Taking of the White House, Tom LoBianco. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
John, thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Glad to have you here. You worked on an article for Business Insider, along with a friend of the show, Dave Leventhal, talking about Jared Kushner's actual involvement in one of these little operations. What were you able to discover?
Yeah, sure. This is called the name. It's a shell company within the Trump campaign. It's called American Made Media Consultants. And where I started with this, and Dave had heard about this. We'd known about this for a while. He actually wrote about this back in July with Campaign Legal Center, filed a complaint about them. He sort of approached it from the campaign finance side of things, and I approached it from the Trump world side of things. And what was so fascinating about this is American-made media consultants spent $617 million out of a $1.26 billion effort to reelect Donald Trump. So you would think that spending half of all that money, which, for anybody is a ton of money, they would have a pretty good handle on where it was going. And I'll tell you that, for months, what I heard from inside the Trump campaign, from people close to the president, was just confusion about this thing. So, we worked on it and got some help from inside. I'll just put it that way without revealing any sourcing. And as it turns out, this company was signed off on by Jared Kushner back in April of 2018, and it was created and started by the Trump family. Really, it was Laura Trump was on the board of this. Eric Trump's top deputy, a guy named Alex Cannon, replaced her on the board later. It's John Pence, the nephew of Vice President Mike Pence. He was on the board as part of this. And they spent a ton of money. And, there's still a lot of confusion about, where exactly did that money go? We were able to piece together some of this, but there's still a lot of questions about where it went. And I think the thing that's just befuddling to me is how much the top people in Trump's own campaign, they're all very top level people, obviously with the exception of Jared Kushner, I think, didn't know where this was going. And it's really I don't know, it's really stunning. Even for Trump world, it's still, it's kind of stunning.
Well, yeah, I guess people thought we had discovered the story of grift in the campaign with Brad Parscale and he's got a nice car. Maybe he got himself some money. We don't know for sure, like you said, what happened with those more than $600 million. But this is certainly a group that has not necessarily been shy about enriching themselves or funneling money through Trump-owned properties and things like that. The fact that it's secretive even inside of the Trump inner circle really stands out. But really fast, just for context, the people affiliated with the families of both of the candidates setting up a shell company to direct the money, is that a thing that we have seen with other campaigns historically? Did Barack Obama have a company like this, or Clinton, or George W.?
Well, what this was modeled off of, which frankly is equally, perhaps not equally opaque, but still quite opaque. You've seen this from Obama's campaign and from the Mitt Romney campaign, is sort of moving money out through a single advertising vendor. So, the TV ads that you see on, in between football games on Sunday or whatever, these gauzy shots that are pro-Obama, pro-Romney or whatever, anti-Romney, anti-Obama. There was a model for this, which is spending directly through these advertising agencies. You'd pick one. Trump or Obama used a Democratic firm called GMMB. I forget the exact amount that they used. Romney did something a little bit different. He created effectively created an advertising firm called American Rambler. And what's interesting is if you go back to the context of where this was in the moment of the Trump campaign, the reelect and everything, back in spring of 2018, Brad Parscale had just been elevated as the campaign manager, and there was a lot of like consternation behind the scenes about him paying himself out of the campaign. His Parscale, Giles Parscale, and then eventually Parscale Strategy, some other different companies. There was a lot of consternation about that. So, what we found out and reported on was that this was originally an effort to kind of clear up those concerns that the Trump family members had about him. What they did was they had a meeting over at the Jones Day law firm, famous, that's where Don McGahn, former White House counsel, came out of, Bill McGinley, number of other folks. They had a meeting over there with the Republican election super lawyer, Ben Ginsburg. I always, this was probably, I guess this might be, simplistic, perhaps too simplistic, but whenever I think about these things, I always seem to come back to that. I think it was like a 2008 HBO movie, Recount, with Kevin Spacey is in there. I think he plays Ron Klain, and Christopher Warren, or one of those guys, John Hurt, I can't think, plays Christopher Warren. Anyway, there's a character, Ben Ginsburg, Republican super lawyer, has a starring role in this movie. And I would encourage everyone to go back and watch it. I think we largely avoided a repeat of a Florida 2000 disaster, but all in all, these are still huge players. I mean, the guy for the Democrats is now the chief of staff for the White House. Yeah. Ben Ginsburg is the guy who advised them and said in this meeting at Jones Day Law Firm, and said, hey, on 2012 on Romney, we created a thing called American Rambler, and this is, maybe you could use that. Now, this is not American Rambler. This is not an in-house ad agency. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 steps further than that. And frankly, it's still hard to tell exactly because we don't have all the answers on this. The way that American-made media consultants worked was the Trump campaign would consult with the vendors who were purchasing advertising, doing digital, radio, TV, et cetera, for them. And they would negotiate directly, and then the payments would come from the shell company. And a lot of these arrangements were, fairly typical. But they also hid a few things. Let's put it that way. They, among other things, it hid payments. These are things that were not publicly disclosed. They hid payments of salary to Kimberly Guilfoyle, the longtime girlfriend, or kind of longtime girlfriend of Donald Trump Jr., and Laura Trump, the wife of Eric Trump, and a board member of the shell company. And look, we've had Democratic after we broke this story about a week and a half ago or so. We had Democratic reps Ted Lieu from California, Kathleen Rice from New York, Mark Foucan in Wisconsin, all asked the FBI and the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, to investigate this, look into whether any laws were broken here, because it is a potential felony if you're using campaign funds to enrich yourself. That's a big question. We don't know that directly, but that's one of the questions they posed in their letter requesting an investigation. It's also a violation to not disclose campaign payments. And I understand that the FEC has been nothing if not dysfunctional under Trump, and in large part because he wouldn't make the appointments to the FEC. But Biden's coming in, and we now have new board members of the FEC. So it is refunctional now. And as it is refunctional, there's a question of, okay, was $617 million laundered, and were any laws broken in that process? It appears a likely yes, at least in terms of disclosure, but still so many questions around this, and just a ton of questions around this.
Yeah, and I want to turn to the disclosure. This is obviously a gigantic amount of money, and it's not dark super PAC money that's sort of technically disconnected from the campaign, but related to it. This is the actual campaign. Yeah. So the fact that we don't know where all this money went, is there an inevitability to finding out? Or is it possible that they're going to continue to stonewall as they already have? And especially, like you talked about the possibility of the FEC under Biden being more functional. Is it Biden has indicated in some areas that he's not interested in looking backward and investigating illegality. Has there been any indication that campaign finance might be an exception to that philosophy?
Yes. So on terms of finding out, what was so funny about this, and I don't, I don't know if it inspired us more than usual, but whenever you tell a reporter that you're not going to find something, they just really want to find it more. And there were people around the Trump campaign, there were Trump advisors who seemed to kind of use this over the summer as a cudgel to really bludgeon Parscale to try to push him out, and it worked. And there were a lot of questions around that. But one thing I noticed is that after the election, interest from certain sectors in this operation, the shell company, and uncovering it, died down. And I had people starting to tell me, like, yeah, look, you're never really going to find out about this. Maybe your window of opportunity might have closed here. So many other things going on, just trying to brush us off the story. And I got to be honest, like, it made me even more motivated than before. And so will we get answers eventually? Potentially. A lot of that has to do with how the FEC handles this. Does the Trump campaign decide that they want to disclose this? I've heard varying responses from people close to the campaign and people close to the president. That itself is also another big question. I mean, to me, at least, this is very much a live story. We're still in the middle of discovering all this.
And somewhat disconnected, but you've talked about these sums of money. I'm assuming that all of this is campaign spending leading up to the election day, right? And stopping there? Yeah,
so what this, to understand the universe of that number, the 1.26 billion combined, this is, it's all the spending up to the last FEC report filed prior to the election. Yes. And then we use the post-general election report. And don't want to go too deep into the methodology there, but it's all these things are itemized. If they've been filed and been sitting around the FEC for a while, their people have enough time to itemize them and make them searchable. And I have to tell you, the FEC, I forget when they updated the website. The FEC is great for searching information, so much better than it used to be. But then the post-general report, you have to actually download the raw data and itemize it yourself. And it's not that hard. I mean, frankly, what I saw, it was pretty big numbers moving through there. I think there was like a total of like 608 entries, combined made, payments from the Trump campaign to the shell company. So, not terribly hard to dissect. And they give you an idea of where it's going to. Some of it was for text messaging, some of it for digital list rental services. I think like one large lump sum was like $5 million that they paid out to rent a list. So, a couple of different things. But where it gets murky is then, what do they mean by that, right? Typically you could find in any presidential campaign, all right, Jen O'Malley Dixon is being paid X by the Biden campaign, all right? That's being reported here. There were some cases where people kind of pushed us to be like, oh, Bill Stepien, the current campaign manager, and his team were hiding the payments. But we did find their salaries paid and reported to the FEC. What was really funny to me was the ostensible president of American Made Media Company, a guy named Sean Dolman, who's the CFO of the Trump campaign. Dave found this one. We laughed our asses off. The guy who's the president of the shell company was getting a regular salary paid through the Trump campaign directly and being reported to the FEC. He wasn't using the shell company.
Yeah, that's interesting. Man, it's going to be really interesting to see if Biden is interested in looking into that. And then, by the way, I think there's a very good chance, as you sort of alluded to, that there was some personal enrichment going on with that campaign money that was raised and spent before the election. But we also know that Trump has raised hundreds of millions of dollars since the election, and he's on his way out. I would assume that if there was going to be some looting going on, this money would probably be a target of that. Perhaps future investigations from Business Insider will look into that.
That could be on the plate, man.
Yeah. In any event, Tom, as always, really appreciate you joining us. Everyone, if you want more details, they're certainly available at the article, which is available at Business Insider. So everyone go take a look. And Tom, thank you again.
Thank you, John.